Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is March 16, 2022. For those of you that might be new to this format or to the broadcasts, every other episode is a question and answer. So any questions you send in between, even if you're not a live watcher of the broadcast, I will answer those during the broadcast. We collect all of the mailed in or sent in questions first, and then we get to any live questions that are present. I think we have 5 or 6 questions to begin that start off in the queue. And as always, with every topic, including the question and answer, part of the idea for me is to bring the question, the concept into a bigger framework, into a bigger context. So even if it's a question that doesn't quite fit your circumstance, what's the kind of thinking that goes into thinking about the question and answering the question? And for me, that's a fundamental value at Evoke is that this work is a transformation in the way that we think, the way that we relate to each other, a transformation in what it means to be a human being on this planet and to be in connection to other people. So with that preamble, I'll get right into the pre-submitted questions. The first question for this evening says, my 17-and-a-half-year-old excelled at Evoke, spent a year really growing and maturing in a therapeutic boarding school. In January, he started a regular boarding school and he's enjoying it, doing well with schoolwork and making friends, and is mostly enjoyable to be around. He went to Evoke originally for isolation, social anxiety, and school refusal, not for any substance abuse. He now has friends and even brought one home for winter break, which is a huge milestone. I realized he and his friend were smoking pot on several occasions, which my son admitted when I asked him calmly, and that sometimes he smokes at school with his friends. He insists that he's not an addicted person and he only does this with his peers when they do. How should we handle this? Very good, and is often the case, very difficult question to answer. You know, I have several thoughts about this. Every parent, every person has the sacred right, if you will. That's how strongly I believe in this, to manage the energy, the people, the behavior around them, either in terms of setting boundaries in your house or removing yourself from the situation if it's a relationship or a conversation. So you have the right to do anything. So to answer what should you do is just a little bit off of the kind of thinking that we think about when we go into this question. You know, if he's an adult, and it sounds like that he is, or it sounds like I guess he's 17 and a half now, and he's functioning well. One of the things that we can do, we're allowed to do, I'm giving you permission to do it, is to manage behaviors in the way that he treats you, rather than what we might think of as the means to the end. You know, cannabis use is going to become more consistent in our country as it becomes more legal recreationally. And in some ways, the risks of cannabis are less than, or at least different than alcohol. And we could argue that alcohol, in terms of domestic violence, violence in general, drunk driving accidents, so forth, and the impact on our health, on our body, we could even argue that alcohol's a worse drug, a more dangerous, more lethal drug, more devastating drug. So part of that is going to change over the next few years as it becomes more mainstream. I'm not telling you what you should do or how you should manage it. If your child, with my children, what I say is, look, you can, when you get older, when you become an adult, you can use whatever you want to. You can experiment with whatever you want to. But because of what I know about brain science, when you're a minor living in my home, I'm not going to turn away from that. I'm going to intervene. I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to manage that behavior, because the risks of introducing alcohol or drugs to a young brain predispose it to addiction, in a really, really profound way. So your son is a little bit under 18. So, there's, if I were counseling you about what to do, I would probably pay attention to how he's doing. Is he doing his schoolwork? How's he treating you? I would probably encourage you to set some pretty clear boundaries around the house. But again, to begin to manage somebody's, substance use, especially at college, as an end only, I think could be missing the mark. I think you could be paying too much attention to something that in a spiritual or psychological sense is none of your business. Again, you have the right as a parent to to set any parameters around your financial support. Maybe you're paying for college or for other living expenses, and so you can set boundaries around that. I'm not inclined to, and I think for a lot of our clients, your son doesn't sound like he has a history of substance abuse, and so again, the risk is lower. But I'm just not inclined to encourage or get really strong in my position about setting a boundary. I think children after they complete treatment, like your son has, are trying to figure out who they are and how they fit into the world in a larger picture. Part of what I hope for parents and children is that when a child does, if something does become a problem for them, that you would be a resource for them to come and talk to. And if you're simply managing the behavior in kind of a black and white pass or fail way, it's not exactly safe for the adolescent to come to you and asking for help and needing help. So you can probably feel some of my leaning towards it, but really I empower parents to set boundaries around their support, around their own environment, around the way that people treat them. You can do any and all of that. I think it's your sacred right to do that. And then I think we get into more subtle and gray areas like this one. Um, I wouldn't be inclined to do much about it, given the information that you've given me, given his age, given his treatment background, and then I would just kind of watch him, pay attention to see if it starts to interact with him in a way that becomes problematic. If he starts to lose motivation, lose focus, if his behavior towards you is different, if his, you know, I always say to my children, especially as they get older, like part of it is just handling your business. If you can handle your business, then you're going to get much more leeway and freedom from my perspective in the home. If you're not managing your business, then I'm going to become involved in those smaller details of life. I'm going to start to be inclined to manage those kinds of things. So, yeah, that's my thought on it. I hope that's helpful. And again, it's not a should or shouldn't, and you have the right to be you. And when I think about the child's development, I think it's probably part of him figuring himself out. That's my best guess. Somebody writes, one of the profound adjustments we are going through right now is that reframing the story of my son has also spun now every story we've ever known about family and friends. I love that first sentence. For example, we used to normalize stories about friends who drank and used drugs for years and did things that we can't laugh at anymore now that our son has had seriously risky behavior. But I wrestle with this idea now that my son's teen behavior is pathologized and necessarily to keep him from harm. But what does that imply for stories at the past, or the idea that teen and young adult years are meant to have these kids' stories, such as drinking too much, partying, etc.? I mean, I think this question is a great follow-up to the first one, because you kind of heard in the first one. I spent a lot of my time in my career coaching parents and teaching parents that if they can learn to incorporate the messiness of development, the messiness of becoming a self, if they can learn to value mistakes and setbacks as much as they value successes, then I think it creates a context for the child to more easily figure themselves out. And so the first part of your story is, and I'll say something else. I don't have the same opinion that many people that treat teens and young adults have about certain behaviors like substance use and acting out behaviors. I'm not inclined toward a zero tolerance policy. In fact, I think zero tolerance is, I think it's simplistic. I think it's part of a thinking error and a thinking problem. Again, I have young children. I have a young child still in the home, and I've let her know, look, it's not like you're going to be kicked out of the house if I find out you use, but if you use, I'm going to pay attention to it. I'm going to manage it. You're young enough that I'm really worried about the risks. And so I don't think of it in black and white terms anymore. I think of it as part of a greater context. And think about this. This is probably the most important thing I could say about these two questions combined. Think about this. If your child were to go to treatment, either because you sent them because you could, or you used money to leverage, and then they ended up going to treatment so to maintain your support, or they ended up even being convinced that they need treatment. This is true of all of those circumstances, those scenarios. If that happened, if your child showed up in a treatment facility of virtually any kind where they were treating the substance use as a symptom, the cure would be what you're doing right now. You know, we're a treatment program. Evoke is a treatment program. You know, at least half of our program is a treatment program. The wilderness therapy part of it is, and it's about family communication. It's about learning to feel. It's about boundaries. It's about learning what healthy connection looks like. It's about parents healing their own wounds. It's about children being able to say to parents, here's how you hurt me, and here's where I'm angry with you. So, in a sense, you see, the treatment for substance use or substance use disorder is not just ripping away the substances and setting a bunch of boundaries around substance use. That can come out of the work, but that's not the work. If your child or your loved one ends up in a program anywhere in the world, virtually any treatment program that is of any quality, you're going to be talking about everything else except for the substances. The same way that if your child had an eating disorder, you wouldn't be talking about food and weight and numbers on a scale. The same way that you'd be talking about virtually any symptomatic behavior, and you'd be trying to find the root of it and trying to create a new pathway or a new stage for the expression of feelings or a different way to get needs met. And so, substance use, cutting on yourself, suicidality, eating disorders, social anxiety, school refusal. When we get into treatment, we don't spend a lot of time talking about the symptoms. The symptoms, I mean, this is fundamental. The symptoms are meant to distract the client themselves, the identified patient, and everybody else, including the treatment professionals. And one of the issues I have in the treatment field today, especially with families with children that end up in programs like ours, is the fact that they're too behavioral. The fact that we're measuring success by this binary of use versus not use. It's much more complicated, and the healing is much more subtle and nuanced than simple sobriety. Remember this, and for those of you who might be new to the podcast or to the broadcast, I'll share this with you. Remember that a great resource to look at that I'm about to quote from is a TED Talk by Johann Hari, Hari, I believe, Johann Hari. And I believe the title of it is Everything We Know About Addiction is Wrong, something like that, or very close. Um, and I'm gonna this is a spoiler alert because I'm about to tell you his concluding statement on his broadcast. It's quite amazing. I would recommend it to the both of the folks who've asked the questions. I'd recommend it virtually to any parent who's listening or watching this, or even a loved one, a spouse, a partner, to watch the TED Talk that I just mentioned. The concluding statement by Johann Hari is the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. Substance use is an attempt to get one's needs met chemically because we can't seem to, that person can't seem to find a way to feel okay enough in the world. It's an attempt to substance use or other symptoms are an attempt to not be present in your own life. And so if treatment professionals, let alone parents, if treatment professionals focus too much on the symptom is winning. The symptom is doing its job. The symptom is a red herring. We would think about in logical fallacy terms. It's supposed to distract us from really what's going on, which is the experience that the person is having inside. So as I talk about this, I'm going to take one more aside before I conclude these first two questions. Um, Part of what I talk about on these broadcasts is to change your way of thinking so that you realize that the goal is not to raise good kids doing good things, but the goal is healing yourself, becoming aware of yourself. And the more that you do that, the more you're able to see your child. I wrote something yesterday on social media where I talked about this idea that a parent not understanding why a child is doing something or having some really cogent, clear, good guesses at why the child is doing it, not understanding the child perpetually is often evidence of a parent's lack of self-awareness. This borrows from the concept that Jung was teaching about when he wrote, "The best way to understand somebody's darkness is to understand your own." Or what I talk about, the key to understanding the universe is to understanding this. And for those of you that are listening, I'm pointing at, my brain, my head, what's going on inside of me. So taking taking these questions about substance use in this context, I think there are so many more things in this specific, with what I know, this specific instance. There are so many dynamics, issues, feelings, thoughts, contexts. There's so many different things to pay attention to that have so little to do with the substance use or not. When I work with young adults, sometimes even teenagers in their later years, and they say to me, "I'm not an addict." In fact, I just said this to somebody recently who was asking me about a family member. I say, "Great, you're not an addict. I'm not going to take any energy. I never was going to trying to convince you that you are. So if you're not, this work, meaning the therapeutic work that we're doing, is to make sure that you don't become one, and that if you do become an addict, compulsively using substances at the cost of social, emotional, physical, work relationships, all those other areas in life, if you do become an addict or compulsively using, then you know where to go to get help. You know how to get help. You know how to ask for help." But again, when I'm talking to parents that are considering our program for their child, I don't do a hard sell. I don't think about it that way. I'll often say at the end of the end of the consultation or the phone call, I'll say, you know, "Good luck to you. I hope you find what you're needing for you and for your child, for your family. But in the meantime, here's the podcast. In the meantime, here's a couple of books that I wrote or that people wrote that apply. Because if you get into treatment, this is what you're going to have to do anyway. You're going to be asked and invited to participate in these kinds of discussions and this kind of education and this kind of process." So that is my very long-winded answer to what probably was thought of as a very simple question. Thank you. Somebody writes, "You've asked parents to attend 6 Al-Anon type programs, but I find that connecting with parents, especially in substance abuse, is fraught. So many want to share with me immediately their stories that are often years long and involve a lot of crises, and then I am traumatized myself. I recognize this is because I can't see their story as separate from my son's. Do you have any thoughts?" Gosh, what a great comment and question. Because I have recommended, though, we do recommend that at Evoke, we ask all current parents to try 6 12-step support groups. Um, and I've heard parents share with me, or even individuals share with me, how impacted, how traumatized, how triggered they can be hearing some of the stories. And I have compassion and empathy for that. I think what I would say to you is, this is going to sound a little bit crazy. Well, two options. I'll tell you two options. The first option is the crazy one. Keep going and keep, you know, when somebody shares a story like that with you, ask them questions. Tell them about your trauma, your anxiety. Tell them about how you're identifying with their story and it's terrifying to you. The second option is stop going. Don't go. And that's always an option, right? I have to. I mean, uh, a fundamental idea at Evoke Therapy, and I don't think this is as universal as I would like it to be at programs. A fundamental idea is we trust your instincts. And what we learn about through psychology and through philosophy and through mythology is that the journey of self-discovery, of awareness, the journey toward enlightenment is fraught with a lot of missteps and sidetracks and detours and exits on and off the path. That it's a messy, complex, complicated path. So sometimes, somebody comes to me and says, "I want to start a new business." Let's say it's not even a parenting issue. And they're saying, some people are saying I'm too old, or there's a better way to do this. And other people are saying, go for it. And I don't know how to interpret all those voices, and they want to hear my perspective. And my thought is, I think you'll figure it out. And even if you do it and it fails, it's not a failure. I don't need to belabor the point that so many successful people that we all know about who become famous because of their successes from sports and arts and acting and business, um, medicine, so many of these fields, the most successful people will tell you that it was the mistakes and the missteps that taught them the most. And it's why I think that the role for parent is to be there to support the child, to help the child where they need to go. First and foremost, my assumption is, maintaining your boundaries and getting clear about what's okay and not okay with you, right? That's the work. But to be available so that when the child does, you want to be your child's first call, or your friend or your partner's first call when they're in trouble. You don't want to be their second or third or fifth call, or not a call at all, because then you can't be there for them. And if you're not safe, if they expect an "I told you so" or a judgment, or your fear to be triggered so much that you can't stay present with them, they're not going to call you first, and maybe not at all. And that's why your work, my work, Brad Reedy's work as a executive clinical director and founder and part owner of this program, that's why my work is so important, so that I can be there for you, so that I can see you. Right? That's why I continue to do my work, is so that it blesses me, of course, intrinsically, but so that I can be there for you and meet you where you're at. So um, part of part of your reaction is part of the disorder of codependency. I mean, that's why the first suggestion about keep going, both sounds crazy, but also is relevant. Your reaction to their story is part of the problem. Now, if you want to stop going, you have my support 100% without qualification. And if you're open to another idea, keep going, keep talking about it, and understanding that your nervous system response, your fear response, is part of your internal process that's getting in the way of parenting, that's getting in the way of being in relationships, that's getting in the way of being a safe person. The fear, the anxiety that you're describing is, in essence, to say it a more simplistic way, it's part of the disease that you're going there for. You're going there for the cure to the problem, and that anxiety response that you've described very articulately is a part of the problem. That's why I say 6. I say 6 because that's what they recommend. But listen and ask questions and share. One important thing, I think that this is so important as a therapist, but also as a friend, a mentor, a sponsor, whatever role you are. One important thing is that when you tell me how you're feeling, what's going on for you, that I can be there for you and be curious about it and stay in a dialogue and a conversation, share what works for me, share some perspective that I might have. And so it doesn't help for you not to tell people how you're feeling. Now, as many of you, if not all of you, will know, sometimes when you tell people how you're feeling, they try to fix it. They try to gaslight you. They try to dismiss it. They try to talk you out of it. And that's just a sign of their lack of capacity to, what we might say in therapy, to hold space. The technical term is to contain you, but it sounds kind of strange. Um, so talk to somebody that you trust, and tell them that, like you're doing now. I suspect by writing it, by sending it in to me. Ask somebody what you're feeling, so they can be in relationship with you about it and talk to you about it. And thank you for sharing the TED Talk link, Malia. It's worth it. It's fascinating, and he does a fantastic job. And it's like, I think all TED Talks, it's 15 minutes, so it's easy to digest. And I think it's, if I were in charge of a high school, every student that went through the high school would have to watch this. Every parent would be assigned to watch this, among other things, as a part of their education about being a human. Somebody writes, if a child attends a therapeutic boarding school in high school, does it limit to what boarding schools will accept them? Sometimes yes. Sometimes yes. But that limiting isn't a bad thing necessarily. What I mean by that is, I think it was Groucho Marx who said I would never want to belong to a club that would have me as its member. He was being funny. It's kind of the opposite here. I would never want to be a member of a club that would exclude me because of my struggles. And I will tell you this: I wrote my college application and I talked about dropping out of high school, drug treatment, drug overdose, getting arrested, and struggles. And part of the reason that I had a really good friend that advocated for me, obviously, because I needed it. But part of when they did talk to me and talk about my acceptance and the conditions of my acceptance to the university that I went to, the woman's name was Debbie Reynolds. I just remember that because that's also the name of a famous person. Debbie said to me, "I really loved your essay, and I loved kind of the lessons and the meaning you got out of this unique path that you were on. And I'd like to extend you an invitation to come to our university." I was on probation in the beginning because I dropped out of high school and had those struggles. But after a semester, I was off probation because I got good grades and I did what I was supposed to do. So at the same time, sometimes the limitations are a gift. Sometimes the limitations are is the program or the group telling you that they're not the right fit for you. So I don't mean that we go around with a letter in our hands or our pockets and tell everybody every mistake that we've ever made. But this was a necessary step that he or she or they needed to take. And without being too simplistic or Pollyannish, I will say I think it'll work out. And I think it's evidence of a struggle, but really what it's about is the lesson. And if he or she or they can't even get an interview to it, that's not the right place. Then you're looking at a system that doesn't value diversity, that it doesn't value somebody who has wisdom that comes out of the life, the school of hard knocks, as they say. And it also shows the university, excuse me, the school that you and your family didn't sit idly by, and that you became a part of investing in the most important parts of your child's future, which is their mental, psychological, spiritual, and physical health. So that's my thought about that. Somebody writes, "I got a lot out of your book, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, and have recommended it and gifted it to other parents. But I always have to explain the title. So help me, please, because this keeps coming up. Why did you call it The Journey of the Heroic Parent and not something like The Hero's Journey of the Parent? People who have heard of Joseph Campbell get it, but when I have to explain it that way, but others have shared my initial reaction that your version suggests something quite different, especially to those who aren't very familiar with Campbell's work." I saw your question come in the other day, and I've been thinking about it ever since a lot. And I have about 4 answers to this. Number one, I feel it too. I actually like explaining it. It's whenever I get interviewed in the media or podcast by somebody else, I always ask them to ask me about the title because the title is instructive. My 2 favorite self-help books, I have 3 favorite self-help books in this area, in the area of parenting. And one of them is The Drama of the Gifted Child, which you might know. One of them is The Dance of Anger. And one of them is Parenting from the Inside Out. That title, by the way, is rock solid. That's a perfect title that is both poetic and also says clearly what it is. But The Dance of Anger and the Drama of the Gifted Child aren't very clear. So the title itself becomes instructive. That's my first answer in response. My second answer is my publisher came up with it. And I didn't disagree with her, but she came up with the wording, and she liked the way that it flowed. And since she has sold hundreds of millions of books under her publishing title, I kind of relied on her for it. But I have heard people say, "I don't want to be a heroic parent. I don't want to be a hero. I just want to be a good enough parent. And I think in some ways the title can be off-putting or alienating to them. And I regret that, and I'm sad about that. And so I'm conflicted about it. If I were renaming it again, it might be something different. I also love it the way that it is. And like I said, I love teaching my philosophy. I love teaching about Joseph Campbell by starting off with the title of the book. And I guess I could just tell you I'm following a long line of my favorite self-help writers or writers in psychology that have titled their books in ways that need explanation, because the drama of the gifted child is not about smart children, and the dance of anger is about anger, but it's really about boundaries. And so I'm following in the tradition of people that I respect. But your point is really well taken, and I appreciate the thoughtfulness of it. And hopefully, it won't be so off-putting to so many people that it doesn't get into the hands of those that need it or could benefit from it. Thank you. Somebody writes, any advice on detaching with love or letting go? I'm working on my recovery in Al-Anon and therapy, but these seem to be my biggest obstacles. What is your experience with this? Many thanks. I think I want to answer this question by saying this. The work takes a long time. A long time. Never ending. In fact, I suspect the work lasts as long as you do. So I was reading something. I was listening to something. There's a really cool video, Malia. Maybe you can look it up, by Ira Glass. It's really an audio, but they did something with words on taste, art, and your taste in art. And he talks about this idea. Ira Glass is a great voice from public radio, great speaker, great host, great thinker. And he says, when you're first starting off in art, you're not very good at it, your craft, whatever it is. But you kind of know that you're not very good at it. And what makes you great is that that you have a taste or an aesthetic that you're aspiring to achieve, and you're not quite there yet. And the people around you who love you, who care about you, your family and friends, they love your initial work because that's their job. But what makes you great is the ambition. It's like what on the back of the Audacity to Be You, the quote that I borrowed from Khalil Gibran that says, "It's in your longing for your giant self that lies your goodness." And so, in that sense, I think the fact that that that's the work means that you're on the path. And I'm better at letting go than I was a few years ago. I'm better at letting go than I was a year ago. The more I write, the more I think, the more I go to therapy, the more I teach you guys all of this stuff. I just finished the manuscript for my third book. Hope to hear back from the publisher soon. Um, I I realize that as I write something and I have to explain it and teach it, and as I do interviews about it, I learn more and more by thinking about it. And so I think you're on the path. I think you know what the task is, and you're not there yet. And that just tells me that your intellect is sharp and a few steps ahead of your emotional process, but you know what it is. I am much better today at letting go with love and compassion. I'm much better at setting boundaries from a grounded, non-reactive place. I'm much better at setting boundaries without a conflict, without a fight, or without a crisis. I'm much better at detaching from my children's behavior. I'm much better at being assertive without trying to control. And I could go on and on and on. All of the things I just mentioned are part of the question of letting go with love. I'm becoming much better, but you can't get there. I think the biggest, I really wish I could teach this. I'll do my best, but it's so hard to teach. The hardest thing to explain is that there's no substitute for the time and the work. When I wrote the Audacity to Be You, I tried to think when I was writing it. It took me a week to write. And I tried to think to myself, because I thought about everything in it for my entire life leading up to that point, really. And I tried to say, what would I say to people about the work of being a client for 20, at the time, um, 21 years as a client in therapy, or 30 years if you count my adolescence and young adulthood. And basically what I taught in there is, this is what I've learned from being a disciplined client, patient. This is what, as they say, 10,000 hours, the phrase 10,000 hours, do something for 10,000 hours and you're a master. This is my 10,000 hour book, my report, which includes, by the way, lessons from a whole host of mistakes and missteps. And so you'll get there. It's practice, it's discipline. There is no self-help book, there's no therapeutic poem or song. I don't think that even there's anything that can immediately shift you into the new way of thinking. You've just got to be working on it and making progress on it. So I commend you. You're doing it. Keep it up. The work will make it more and more clear to you, and you'll become more and more capable of what you've asked about as you do the work. Somebody or Malia wrote The Gap by Ira Glass, and then she put the videos there. It's really fun to watch. My wife and I watched it 2 nights ago. My son shared it to me. My son's an artist, and he shared it with me a few years ago because he relates his art to my work a lot, and we have conversations from the different vantage point, but really talking about the same principles. Somebody writes, how would you recommend responding to our child who doesn't seem to be engaging in the work out in the field at Evoke, at least in his letters to us? I would talk to the therapist and see if they would guide or direct you. I don't think you have to do the heavy lifting. I wouldn't. I don't think a really dramatic or provocative letter is my first instinct. I think detachment can be a stronger tool for facilitating change than kind of to be overly attached to it. Now, follow the direction from your therapist. Let them guide you. Ask them the same question. But I think it for me, if your child is engaging the program in the way that kind of I'm thinking about, I think it might be saying, like, I'm going to take a vacation. I'm going to take some time away, and I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can make out of this what you need to. And it sounds like you're not really engaging, or you're kind of sitting off to the side, or kind of just watching it go by. And I'm sorry that that's happening, but I'm going to go away for the weekend. I'm going to go skiing, or I'm going to go do something for myself. Go to a spa. Maybe I'm going to go to my own intensive. I'm a big fan of that, of course, and work on myself and my own healing from my own background. Don't get overly involved in their life and their progress, but implicit. Implicit is in the tone of detachment that I'm speaking from and with. Implicit is the boundary. The boundary that part of this is you got to do some stuff, son or daughter. You're gonna have to figure some stuff out before the next step. And I think that boundary being implicit can be even more powerful than it being stated. Because I think that at times it can be a bluff or a threat or an intimidation or an attempt to control. And I think the child can sense that and engage in the power struggle. So I would, again, the therapist is the best person to give you specific direction to your specific situation, given your specific history with your child. But apart from that, my instinct is healthy detachment and the implied boundary that goes with that, and then really handing over to the child's dilemma instead of making it yours. That's my thought. Somebody writes, I feel like my son unintentionally puts me in the middle of him and his father, which was a pattern during my son's addiction. It's happened a few times, but recently my son shared with me a problem he was having with his father on a trip. And when I encouraged him to talk to his father, he said he won't validate me. I encouraged him to at least try to and remind him of all the work his father has done and the many times he has validated his feelings. Is it overstepping to share this with my husband? I felt like it was important to tell him because I know the work my husband put into repairing their relationship and would hate to miss any opportunity to show up for our son. If roles were reversed, I'd want to know. I mean, basically what you're saying is that your instinct is to tell your husband, and again, like I was saying 10 minutes ago, I trust you. Even if it blows up in your face, I trust that you'll figure it out from there. So I like that you're sharing it with his father. You know, my therapist told me something. I don't know why she waited 20 years to teach me this. Maybe she just thought of it herself. But she taught me a couple of years ago. She said, treating people in therapy, resistance, specifically, resistance to healthy change. Treating people in therapy with resistance is like driving a car across a frozen lake. Too much gas, you lose traction. Too much brake, you lose traction, you slip. Too sharp of a turn to the left, you lose traction. Too sharp of a turn to the right, you lose traction. And if let's say you had to drive across that lake every day to deliver mail, not that you're delivering mail to all of the lakefront houses during a winter time. If you drove every day on the frozen lake, you'd get good at it. You'd be faster than you were the first day. You would slip and spin out less. You might even, if you did it for years, be able to tell by the temperature outside and by the look on the ice how slippery it was that day. I suspect you would. And if somebody came to replace you and they said, wow, driving a car on a frozen lake and delivering mail, that sounds crazy. How do I do it? How much gas? How much of a turn? How much can I use the brake? You would say to them, you're just going to have to figure it out, feel it out. You'll just feel it slip. And when you feel it slip, let off the gas or the brake or the steering wheel. Relax. Let it go. Hold your advice and intervention lightly is the idea. So I like what you did with your husband. I like that you told him. If he had responded defensively to it or had taken the information and used it to confront his son, then he wasn't ready for it. Then he was triggered by it. Then he didn't take it and use it the way that you had hoped or wanted or intended. As a therapist, I'm going to say something that, again, you might agree with and might make sense, but I will tell you, it's taken me decades to learn how to live this, like driving across a frozen lake. Part of what you said was, should I tell him? Should I tell his father? I don't want to overstep, you said, but I want to help him. When you're a therapist, that you get a feel for where people are at. You get a feel for what you can suggest and can't. People teach you how ready they are. I taught this in service to the field staff yesterday. If you make an interpretation to a client, give them an idea, teach them something, suggest something, notice something, and point it out. If you make it before they are ready, the client will have the experience of they don't understand. Okay? If you make an interpretation that's wrong, that's inaccurate, they will also have the experience that you don't understand. And so you don't know the difference. And so the question is, what can your husband tolerate? And it sounds like he can tolerate quite a bit. Where is he at? If you said in a moment of anger, if you said in a moment when he was feeling triggered with an interaction with your son, I'm guessing that wouldn't go as well. Strike while the iron is cold. Find a down-regulated moment. Save it from a place of love and humility. And if he starts to get defensive, drop it. Or if he does something with it because he's triggered, drop it. And realize that it's not a good fit for him right now. So, yeah, it's a great question. Sounds like you guys are doing it very artistically. And what I would say is, which is, sharing it with sharing it with your husband, part of what I would say is, with your son, just listen, empathize. My therapist, for years, she would make suggestions where she thought she could, but the glue that held all of the work together was she could empathize. And what was implied by her empathy, her genuine, heartfelt empathy was, she never said this, but at the end of the day, after I felt validated over and over and over again in certain situations and certain relationships, the question that rang in my head was, what are you going to do about it? I wrote something on my social media today that talks about this actually. This idea that I waited for decades for someone to come along and rescue me from my life. Essentially, take away my fear. And what I realized growing up, getting into my late 40s was I had to rescue myself. I had to save myself. Didn't mean I did it alone. I did it with the help of my therapist and a loving wife and some friends that are very supportive and some books and other things like that, some intensives that I intended and so forth. But ultimately, the hardest work, the dragon battle, as Joseph Campbell says, was mine. I had to face and deal with my fear. So that's what I would say. Somebody writes, in fact, I want to take a question. I had a private chat going with somebody, and I asked them a question, and they included the question in the private chat. So I'm gonna do that one now, and then I'll get to the public one that you just posted. Somebody said, "How do you suggest we celebrate failures?" I've told the story. You could look it up and find it, I'm sure. If you just Googled Spanx, the clothing, and the CEO, the founder of Spanx, she said that her father used to, every night at dinner, it was a regular ritual for him to say, who made a mistake today? Let's talk about your failures. And people would share failures, and then he would give a toast. That's a very formulaic, kind of a ceremonial way of celebrating. I'm not talking about that. I mean, just remaining, when I say celebrate the failures, I mean like remain curious. I mean, the thing about it is the reason that we can't remain curious when other people struggle or when they failed is because we haven't healed our own trauma. So we can't think of it in a positive way. If we haven't healed our own trauma and we see our child struggling or experiencing a traumatic event themselves or making a mistake and the natural consequences that come with it, we're more afraid because we haven't made sense out of and integrated our own trauma. When we do heal and integrate our own trauma and we see somebody else struggle, we understand it's part of life, right? That's part of the messy journey of becoming a self. And so I when I say celebrate, I mean be curious, be interested. I don't mean celebrate the way that the Spanx CEO talked about celebrating. I just mean take a we'll see attitude, ask questions. Don't react with terror and fear. If you have terror and fear, go talk to a peer or a therapist, not the child. Step away for a moment. It should be, ideally, I think there should be kind of an equal energy between successes and failures. Carl Jung said it this way. He said, when people would come to my office saying, I just got a promotion or I'm getting married, he would ironically say to them, well, if we work a lot and stick together and really, really, really commit to the work, I think you can get through this. And then if somebody came with a failure, he would say, um, let's open up a bottle of champagne and celebrate. Sigmund Freud, I'm using Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung because they invented therapy. They're the Wright brothers of therapy. Um, Sigmund Freud said, if you want somebody to grow, set them up in a situation where they're sure to fail. So part of our parenting capacity is so connected to our own healing. And I've seen this with parents before. And if you don't heal your own stuff, you try to just prevent mistakes and pain and detours and hurt and consequences even. But if you heal and integrate your own trauma, even big T trauma, then when you see somebody else going through it, you can be present with them because you understand that you would never wish a trauma on anybody. But there's a great line in the movie Finding Joe, which I recommend to everybody by Patrick Solomon. The writer who won the Academy Award for the movie A Beautiful Mind. I forget his name right now. But he says in the documentary that lasts about an hour and 15 minutes, he said, I was abused as a child for a very long time, and it's not something that I share in a lot of circumstances. It's relevant to hear. He said, I would never wish it on anybody, but I get high marks on compassion and empathy. I'm sensitive, and I can respond to other people compassionately. Most of the healers that I know have done a lot of work and made sense out of their trauma. And if somebody had very little to no trauma, which is almost a thought experiment that doesn't exist, I don't know how they could help people because they wouldn't know, wouldn't be able to relate. So the celebration is more about being in a different relationship with failure because you've healed your own regrets, your own fears, your own traumas. And because that healing has occurred and the integration, meaning that it's become a part of you, the gifts have become a part of you, you're able to see it differently when a child or somebody that you care about struggles with it. Oh, great. Malia's really on it today. She's talking about the CEO offers advice on how to redefine failure. Fantastic. Somebody writes, our 17 and a half year old son, our son who is 17 and a half, at home for his second home visit. He is not showing as much anger and hasn't done a few of the chores we added to his expectations. He doesn't seem to want to hang out or talk at all. And I know teens like to be independent. It just seems like the visit is like living with a stranger. There seems to be little connection. It seems like the time away made him used to being away and our closeness is gone. Any thoughts on connecting without forcing anything or making him feel guilty? I don't need his time, but it is a loss. I think this will be the last question, Malia. My first response is to have empathy and compassion for you. And obviously I'm not you, I'm not him, and I don't know. But let me take a shot at a couple of thoughts here. Adolescence is a time for separation. Adolescence is a time for differentiation. One of the ways that we can learn to connect to our adolescent children is by allowing them to have space. I think I've shared with you all that I've learned with my youngest. I wish I'd known this with my older kids, that when I drive her places, that I don't initiate conversations or ask questions to satisfy my social needs with her. I kind of let her take the need. And when she does, I drive her to school virtually every day that I'm home. I drive her to school in the morning, and morning is a different animal, isn't it? You're tired. You're just getting the day going. So I'm taking her to school, and I just give her space, and I do it because it's my gift. Because I find joy in providing her with what she needs that I can, even if it doesn't feel good to me. I haven't told this story in a long time, and I'm going to end with this story this evening. My son, who's now 29, excuse me, yeah, he's 29. When he was 19, he was going on a church mission for 2 years. And it was a Friday, and I was in therapy as I am every Friday with my therapist, and he was going into the education, the training program on Tuesday. And important to know the context. This particular thing that he was doing for 2 years, we were only allowed to talk 3 times a year: Mother's Day, Christmas, and Thanksgiving. Don't get me started on that. But we were only going to talk 3 times a year. He'd been away at college for a year, but that's different. In college, you can text him, you can visit, you can call anytime, vice versa. So he's going away for 2 years, not because he's in trouble, not because he's struggling, but for him and his faith and his life, that's what he wanted to do. Maybe I wouldn't do it. We didn't share the same faith, but that's what he wanted to do. So on that Friday, toward the end of my session, I was saying in tears, like, my firstborn, I just want him to know how much I love him. And I was crying and anticipating the loss that you're describing in a different context. I was describing the loss of him. And my therapist said gently, as I was crying, just finishing up, she said, he already knows exactly how much you love him. Nothing you could say or do in these next 3 or 4 days before he leaves would change his experience of your love for him. And I thought, she's right. It was very comforting. And then she said something more important and even more comforting and kind of funny. She said, and he needs to get as far away from you as he can. And all of my pain disappeared. And I thought, I understand development. She's right. He needs to get far away from me. And my pain turned into a different kind of thing because then I just wanted to do it out of love. A few years later, when my second born child went off to college, it was especially devastating. And I was full of tears for the loss. My children went to school, and my three oldest children have been to school in Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York. So they like to get away and they like to go to big cities. And I know now that I feel that loss, but I've got to fill it up with my own life because I know that's what they need. So I have empathy and compassion for you, person to person, father to mother, father to father, father to other human. Like, I get it. And this is the task. If everything's going well, we should feel some loss with our teenagers, even if they're not struggling with mental health issues or substance abuse disorders. In ideal situations, it would be appropriate for us to feel some loss because of their need for differentiation and separation. So, my thoughts are with you. All right, folks. My two books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are on Amazon and Audible. We have online support groups for a bunch of different folks. For wilderness families, current and former, March 17th at 6:30 p.m. is the next one. For alumni only, we have one alumni only meeting per month, March 22nd at 6:30 p.m. for alumni of our wilderness program. If you are an intensives alumni, April 12th at 6 p.m. is the next offering. Contact intensives at evoketherapy.com for more information. If you want to do a deep dive into your own work, and I cannot oversell this, I cannot overemphasize this, coming to an intensive can be a great springboard or accelerator. We are an attachment-based program. We do use psychodrama, group therapy, art therapy, mindfulness, other kind of therapies, but it's all based on attachment. And so what that means is that we will meet you compassionately wherever you're at. You don't have to come and meet our agenda. We introduce and invite you to participate, but we meet you where you're at. And we believe that that's the healing. That's the balm. That's the pixie dust, the magic stuff, the attachment stuff. April 20th through 24th is our next offering, or we have one on March 25th. I think it's full now. So June 24th will be the next online offering. Again, contact intensives at evoketherapy.com for more information. We have a returning to you. If you participated in a Finding You at Evoke, you can come to Returning to You. It'll be offered by Emma Reedy, my daughter, and Alex White, two fantastic, absolutely fantastic facilitators. So if you want to do an advanced reconnection to your work, May 11th through 15th, it will fill up. It will be sold out. So sign up sooner rather than later. We have coaches for parents, coaches for partners, coaches for individuals that are trained in the attachment-based model. Contact coaching at evoketherapy.com to find out more about our coaches. If you want to do an adventure trip with your family or young adult, we have pursuits programs that last 3 to 30 days, anywhere, all over the world, customized trips. Like I mentioned earlier, based on the question that was asked, we ask all current parents to go to 6 12-step support groups, any combination of Al-Anon, CODA, Families Anonymous, or adult children. I really, really love adult children. Give it a try if you want to try something new. RefugeRecovery.org and NAMI.org are two other places to go to find local classes and resources in your area that are free. All of these broadcasts are available on your podcast app or Spotify. Just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast and you'll find it. You can also go to soundcloud.com on your computer. You can find Evoke or me, Brad, on Twitter and Instagram using the handles at Evoke Therapy or at Dr. Brad Reedy. And of course, our intensives program has an Instagram account at Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And then we have a Evoke blog on our website that's curated and maintained by Malia, who does a fantastic job. My next broadcast, I'm really excited. Jamie Gill's new book. There's a especially good chapter on rebellion. is called Context. I'm going to be doing a review of that on my next broadcast. So on March 23rd at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time, I'm going to be reviewing Context by J.D. Gill. And then on March 29th, I'm going to be doing a Q&A for family and friends just like this one. You can go to the website to find out about upcoming broadcasts all the time. Thank you for joining me. I hope this is a helpful point of contact for and on behalf of the people that love you, your family members, your children. Thank you for being willing to do the work. Keep it up. It is the key to unlocking all the doors that are locked in our lives, is finding yourself and reconnecting to yourself. Have a great evening. Take care, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.